My grandma left me a house in her will. But it belonged to someone else. My grandma passed away unexpectedly. I loved her, but we weren't particularly close. She was old school, private, and never talked much about her past. So when I found out she left me a house in her will, I was shocked. I didn't even know she owned a house. She had lived in a small apartment for as long as I could remember. But there it was, written in black and white. A house in a small town I had never even heard of. Curious and honestly a little excited, I packed a bag and drove out to see what I had inherited. I had no idea what I was walking into. The house was old, but beautiful. A little rundown, covered in vines, but still standing strong. It looked like something from a different era, because it was. The moment I stepped onto the porch, the door swung open. An old man stood in the doorway, staring at me like I was the intruder. Before I could say anything, he snapped, "You're trespassing. Get off my property." I froze. I told him my name. I told him this house was left to me. His face didn't change. "That's not possible," he said. "Because this house has belonged to my family for generations." I pulled out the legal documents proving the house was mine. The old man, who introduced himself as Walter, didn't even look at them. He just shook his head and said, "This house was never for sale. Your grandma didn't own it." Now I was confused. I went into town, hoping to dig up some kind of record. What I found made no sense. The house wasn't listed under my grandma's name. In fact, it had never been sold. It had always been in Walter's family. So why did my grandma leave it to me? And why was her name connected to it in the first place? I went back to Walter's house, determined to get answers. I asked him if he knew my grandmother. For the first time, his expression changed. Not anger. Not annoyance. Something else. Something like guilt. He sighed and told me, "You should leave this alone." But I wasn't leaving without the truth. I kept pushing until finally, he said, "Your grandmother wasn't supposed to own this house. She stole it." Walter told me that years ago, before I was born, my grandmother had worked for his family as a housekeeper. Then one day, she disappeared with a suitcase full of stolen documents. Shortly after that, his grandfather died under mysterious circumstances. The family tried to fight it, but by the time they realized what had happened, the property records had been changed. Walter was forced to leave the house behind, and my grandmother had vanished with the deed. Now, after all these years, she had passed it down to me, but legally, it was never hers to give. I sat there, stunned. My sweet, quiet grandma was a thief. And worse? Walter wasn't the only one who wanted this house back. Someone else had been watching. And they weren't happy I was digging into the past. Do I fight for the house knowing it was never really mine? Or do I walk away before I uncover something even worse? Because some inheritances are more like curses. And I just stepped right into one.
My husband's business trip didn't exist, so where the hell did he go? My husband, Ethan, traveled for work all the time. It was normal, 3-day trips, back-to-back meetings, corporate dinners. I never questioned it. So when he told me he had to fly out to Chicago for a conference, I barely blinked. He packed his suitcase, kissed me goodbye, and left for the airport like he always did. Everything seemed normal. Until I got an email meant for him. It was from his company, a travel itinerary for his next trip. The destination? New York. The dates? 2 weeks from now. But nothing about Chicago. There was no record of this trip, no company expense report. No flight reservation. So where the hell did he go? I called Ethan, casually asking how the flight was. There was a pause. Just for a second. Then he said, long delayed. "You know how it is." I smiled, pretended I didn't already know he wasn't on any flight. I asked about his hotel. He dodged the question. That's when I knew he was lying. But I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I needed proof. I logged into our joint bank account, expecting to see charges from a Chicago hotel, maybe a restaurant. Instead, I found 3 transactions that made my stomach drop. A gas station receipt, not in Chicago, but 2 towns away from ours. A bar tab, for 2 people. A hotel charge, a boutique hotel that neither of us had ever stayed at before. He never even left the state. But he had checked into a hotel with someone else. I waited until he came home. Same fake smile. Same rehearsed story ***. I let him unpack. Let him shower. Let him feel safe. Then I slid the bank statements across the table. His whole face changed. I didn't even have to ask the question. He knew he was caught. And then, he said something I wasn't expecting. "It's not what you think." I laughed. "Not what I think." So I laid it out for him. The fake flight. The hotel charge. The bar tab for 2 ***. He swallowed hard. Then he finally said it. I wasn't with another woman. That stopped me cold. Because he sounded like he was telling the truth. But if it wasn't another woman, then what the hell was it? Ethan rubbed his face, looking exhausted. Then he told me. He had been meeting someone, but not for an affair. For money. Apparently, he had a massive debt I didn't know about. A gambling problem he had kept hidden for years. He had been meeting with someone he owed money to. Someone dangerous. He looked me in the eye and said, "I didn't want to drag you into it." And for a moment, I almost believed him. Until I saw his phone light up. A message. From an unknown number. "You still owe us. You know what happens next." And that's when I realized. My husband hadn't just lied. He had put both of us in danger. Do I run? Do I stay and fix his mess? Or do I find out just how deep this secret really goes?
I agreed to drive for some quick cash, then realized I was smuggling drugs. I was flat broke. Rent was overdue, my credit card was maxed out, and I had barely enough cash for gas. So when my coworker, Danny, mentioned he had a way to make easy money, I was desperate enough to listen. "It's just driving," he said. "No questions asked. You pick up a package, drop it off. Takes 2 hours, and you get $1,500 in cash." I should have asked more questions. I should have known that kind of money doesn't come without strings. But all I saw was an opportunity to fix my problems. So I said yes. The job seemed simple. Danny gave me an address, a time, and told me not to be late. I drove to a rundown gas station on the outskirts of town, pulled up near the pumps, and waited. A guy in a hoodie and sunglasses knocked on my window. He didn't introduce himself, didn't say a word. He just handed me a duffel bag and nodded toward my trunk. I hesitated. "Just take it," he muttered. "Don't look inside." I felt my stomach tighten, but I popped the trunk and put the bag in without asking questions. The drop-off location was in a quiet neighborhood, at a house that looked way too normal for something this shady. I pulled up, left the bag on the doorstep like it was a pizza delivery, and drove off. By the time I got home, the money was already in my account. Easiest cash I'd ever made. So when they asked me to do it again, I didn't hesitate. I ran 3 more trips that week. Same process. Pick up, drop off, get paid. But on the 4th trip, I made a mistake. I got stuck in traffic. A bad accident had backed up the freeway for miles. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You're late." That's a problem. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking on the wheel. When I finally got to the drop-off point, the guy waiting for the package wasn't happy. "You ever get held up again, don't bother showing up," he muttered. That was the first time I felt actual fear. And it only got worse. After that night, I started thinking too much. What the hell was I even delivering? Was I moving drugs? Weapons? Something worse? So, on my next run, I broke the one rule I wasn't supposed to break. I opened the bag. Inside? Bricks of cocaine. Thousands of dollars worth. I slammed the bag shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I was a drug mule. And I had just looked inside the package. I was still panicking when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. You looked inside the bag, didn't you? My blood went ice cold. I didn't say anything. Didn't even breathe. The voice on the other end just laughed softly. Then they said, "You've got one more trip. And if you screw this one up, you won't get another chance." And I knew exactly what they meant. I had two choices. Do the last job and walk away. Run, and hope they don't come after me. I wasn't stupid. These people weren't just some local dealers. They had resources. They knew my name, my car, my address. So I made the drop. One last time. When I got home, I packed my bags and left town that same night. I changed my number. Blocked every contact I had from that world. And I've never looked back. But sometimes, I still check my mirrors a little too often. Because people like that? They never really let you go.
My Uber driver was too friendly, and then I found out why. It was late, probably around 1 a.m., and I just wanted to get home. I had been out with some friends, had a few drinks, and the idea of dealing with public transport sounded like pure hell. So, I did what I always did. I ordered an Uber. The driver's name was Raymond. His rating was solid, 4.9 stars. He had a profile picture that looked like every other middle-aged dad you'd see at a grocery store. Nothing sketchy. The car pulled up. Clean. Smelled normal. No red flags. But the moment I got in, something felt off. At first, it was just small talk. "Long night?" he asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I nodded, gave him a short answer, hoping that would be the end of it. It wasn't. He started asking more questions. Where did I live? Did I go out often? Did I live alone? His tone wasn't outright creepy, but it was too personal. Like he was trying to get information without making it seem like an interrogation. I gave vague answers, looking at my phone, trying to signal that I wasn't in the mood to chat. He didn't take the hint. Instead, he said something that made my skin crawl. "I actually picked you up once before. Do you remember?" I frowned. I had never seen this man before in my life. But before I could say anything, he smiled. "Don't worry, I remember you." I felt a chill go through me, but I forced myself to laugh it off. Maybe he was mistaken. Then, the GPS told him to take a left. He took a right. I think you missed the turn," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He didn't even look at the screen. "I know a shortcut," he said. My stomach dropped. I stared at my phone, my pulse racing. The blue dot, my location, was moving further away from my apartment, not toward it. I tried to act casual. Maybe it really was a shortcut. But then, he reached over and turned off the Uber app. I watched as my screen switched from tracking the ride to a simple, trip-ended message. We weren't even close to my destination. And now, no one was tracking me. My hands were sweaty. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I forced a smile. "Actually, I'm feeling kind of sick. Can you just drop me off here?" He didn't answer. He just kept driving. I was in the back seat of a locked car, with no one knowing where I was. I tried opening the door casually, just to check, child locks were on. Now I was really panicking. I pulled up my phone, texting a friend as fast as I could. Call me now." Before I could even hit send, he spoke again. "You're a smart girl," he said, too calm. "You didn't put in your real address when you ordered the ride. That's good. That means you're careful." I stared at him, heart hammering. how did he know that? I always put an address a few blocks away from my actual place when I ordered rides, just in case. I never thought it would actually save me. I swallowed hard. Yeah. I do that all the time, I lied. I don't like strangers knowing where I live. He smiled. That's smart. I glanced at my phone again, my fingers shaking. That's when I realized I still had the emergency button in the Uber app. Even though he had ended the ride, I could still report a safety issue. I tapped it. A pop-up appeared, "Are you in danger?" I hit yes. Instantly, my phone rang. Uber support. A real person. Loud. Clear. Hello? We received an emergency alert. Do you need immediate assistance? Raymond's face changed. He saw the phone screen. He knew what I had done. For a second, we locked eyes in the mirror. Then, without a word, he slammed the brakes. We were on a dark side street, no traffic, no people. Before I could react, he unlocked the doors. "Get out," he said, his voice flat. I didn't wait. I threw the door open and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached a gas station. I called my friend, then called the police. By the time they arrived, Raymond was gone. Uber banned his account immediately, but when the cops looked into him, there was nothing. No criminal record. No reports. It was like he was just another driver. But I knew better. This wasn't random. Because a few nights later, I got a new text from an unknown number. "I'll see you again soon." I moved the next week. I went on a date with a guy who had no social media, then I found out why. I met Elliot on a dating app. Tall, good-looking, well-spoken. Unlike most guys, he didn't just hit me with a lazy, "Hey." He actually asked about me, seemed interested, didn't give off any red flags. The only weird thing? No social media. No Instagram. No Facebook. No LinkedIn. Nothing. When I asked about it, he shrugged and said, "I just like my privacy." I wasn't used to that, but honestly, it was refreshing. No thirst traps, no cringy gym selfies. Just a guy who seemed genuine. So, when he asked me to dinner, I said yes. I had no idea what I was walking into. The date was perfect. Elliot was charming, smart, funny, but not in an obvious way. He listened, asked great questions, and made me feel like the only person in the room. But something felt off. Whenever I asked him personal questions, about his job, where he grew up, his family, he gave answers that were just vague enough to keep me from digging deeper. I work in consulting. I've moved around a lot, hard to say where I'm from. Family stuff is complicated. It wasn't alarming, but it was odd. Then, halfway through dinner, something even weirder happened. An older man walked in. The second Elliot saw him, his whole vibe changed. He went tense, staring straight down at his plate. His jaw clenched. The man walked past our table, then suddenly stopped. I thought maybe they knew each other, but instead of saying anything, Elliot grabbed my hand. "Let's go," he whispered. "Now." We left the restaurant so fast I barely had time to grab my coat. Outside, I pulled away. "Elliot, what the hell was that?" He was pale. Shaken. Like he had seen a ghost. But he forced a smile and said, "Nothing. Just an old coworker I didn't want to deal with." "A coworker? Who makes that face over a coworker?" I wasn't buying it. But before I could press, he kissed me, hard, like he was trying to distract me. And it worked. For a little while. That night, when I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Elliot was too perfect. Too smooth. Too careful. So, I did what any sane person would do, I went full FBI mode. No social media. No digital footprint. Nothing in Google searches. Then, I tried reverse image searching his dating profile pictures. And that's when I found it. The exact same photos, but under a different name. Not Elliot. Chris Danner. And Chris Danner was listed as a missing person. Missing for 5 years. I was freaking out. Was I dating a ghost? A criminal? A man with a stolen identity? The next morning, I got a text from Elliot. Had a great time last night. Let's do it again soon. I wanted answers. So I agreed. But instead of meeting him, I drove to the police station. I showed them the missing person report. Told them everything. They ran a check on the name. And that's when an officer looked at me like I had just ruined someone's life. Where did you say you met this man? I told them. Then he shook his head and said something that made my skin crawl. Chris Danner isn't missing anymore. Chris Danner, aka Elliot, had disappeared 5 years ago after faking his own death. He had been involved in something bad, witness protection, debts, or maybe something worse. The details were sealed. But one thing was certain. He wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And by searching for him, I had put him back on the map. A week later, his dating profile disappeared. His number was disconnected. His apartment was emptied overnight. He was gone. Again. And I have no idea where he is now.